Preparedness Committee to order. Representative Cooper, if you could please lead us in the pledge. Thank you. Jamie, could you take the roll?
Chairman Solomon,
Here.
Representative Borowski, Representative Brown, designation, Representative Doherty, designation, Representative Genst, designation, Representative Haddock, designation, Representative Ingalls, designation, Representative Monroe, designation, Representative O'Mara, designation, Representative Pielli, Representative Sapi, Representative Scott, designation, Representative Takak, designation, Representative Webster,
Here.
Chairman Gillen, Representative Banta, Representative Bashline, designation, Representative Cooper, Representative Ham, designation, Representative Kerwin, Representative Krupa, Representative Major, designation, Representative Rigby, Representative Sender, Representative Wattrow, Representative Williams. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Jamie. Our first order of business is House Resolution 122, authored by Representative Zimmerman. I will take a motion by Representative Sapi, seconded by Representative Banta, to bring up the resolution. Representative Zimmerman, would you please provide your remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So House Resolution 122, it recognizes March 17 through 21 as Flood Awareness Week in Pennsylvania. I want to thank Chair of the House Insurance Committee, Rep. Perry Warren, for co-priming this resolution with me, as he did in the previous session. And I want to also thank Mr. Chairman for bringing it up before this committee. Chair Warren and I had served on the Flood Insurance Premium Assistance Task Force together. The task force, which was formed last year, conducted a series of meetings where we learned about the prevalence of flooding in Pennsylvania and the devastating personal and financial toll it takes on families. From an insurance perspective, flood coverage is not a part of a homeowner's policy, though many think it is. The task force report includes a series of policy recommendations, including dedicated flood insurance, training for licensed insurance agents, which the General Assembly approved last year. We also discussed enhancing disclosure information on real estate documents when a consumer is in the process of purchasing a home, and other recommendations. It is my hope this resolution will bring awareness on the impact flooding has on Pennsylvania families, both personally and financially. I know my district has been impacted by flooding, like many others in this room. Thanks again for running this resolution and allowing me to speak. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Zimmerman. Questions, comments? Chairman Gillen.
Thank you, Representative Zimmerman. Our districts adjoin one another, and certainly, like many areas in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there's flooding that goes on, particularly in the Wyomissing Valley. There, I think it's especially timely, given a school district in Berks County experienced a substantial loss. Antietam School District, a really wiped out school, has to be replaced to the tune of millions of dollars. Not many months ago, I was in the Carolinas and was involved in relief work there because of substantial flooding that had occurred. So it touches lives, it impacts constituents, and it's something that we ought to all be concerned about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Gillen. Are there any negative votes? House Resolution 122 moves unanimously to the floor. Representative Zimmerman, thanks again. Next up is Representative McKenzie with House Resolution 89. Representative McKenzie please come up. I will take a motion from Representative Watro, seconded by Representative Borowski to bring up the resolution. Representative McKenzie, your remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Solomon, Chairman Gillen, and esteemed committee members for allowing me to speak today about House Resolution 89, which designates March 29th, 2025 as National Vietnam War Veterans Day in Pennsylvania. This resolution holds special significance for me personally, and I believe it does as well for many of my generation. As a kid of the 60s, I am speaking for my friends and my peers. Vietnam was the war of our era. It was the war that cast a long, dark shadow over our high school and college years and scarred the days of our youth. It was a time of confusion and rebellion, and sometimes a suffocating fear, as more and more young men were called up in the draft. Vietnam played a major role in defining the entire culture of the 60s and early 70s. It turned our world upside down. John Lennon sang "Give Peace a Chance," and eventually the end of the war came. But the sadness continued. There were many tears for those who did not come back home, and no hero's welcome for those who did. The effects of the war stuck with us and remain with many of us even unto this day. It is my hope that this resolution will stand to right some of the wrongs that the Vietnam veterans have endured, and that it can convey to them the honor, respect, and appreciation they so richly deserve. I thank them all and thank their family members who are here today. Their sacrifice has not been forgotten. God bless the Vietnam veterans, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any comments or questions on the resolution? Representative Banta.
I want to thank you for the resolution. I have a neighbor, his name is Ed Kufjak, and I grew up on a farm next to him, and he taught me a lot, but he was a Vietnam veteran, never talked much about it. A couple of years ago, the wall came through our town, the Vietnam Wall. It was really inspiring for me to get him out of his house and get him up there, and he was glad he went, and he saw some people on the wall that he knew. So I just want to say I like your comments, and you know, they're correct. They're true that they were kind of the forgotten soldiers, and so anyways, I just want to make that comment today because it's so important to their service. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Banta. Other questions or comments? Chairman Gillen.
In August of 1967, I was a Philadelphia newspaper delivery boy. And certainly the Vietnam War was at the forefront of my thinking. My two cousins were over in Vietnam at the time. But on that particular August day of 1967, what was on the front page of the newspaper, typically on a daily basis, came home to roost a little more closely in our neighborhood because Lance Corporal Robert Allen Schultz on August 11th was killed in a mortar attack in South Vietnam. And so I know for these guests here, which will be introduced after we're done our formal business, this is an especially meaningful moment in their lives. And I would say that the Vietnam War, for those that experienced loss at whatever level, will never be far from our hearts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Gillen. Are there any negative votes? Seeing none, House Resolution 89 moves to the floor for consideration, moves unanimously to the floor for consideration. Our next item of business, House Bill 579, authored by Representative Banta, is going to be over for today. We're going to engage in some stakeholder conversations, and we'll be back with the bill better than before. So thank you for your patience on this, Representative. Next up is House Bill 865, authored by Representative Venkat. I will take a motion from Representative Rigby, seconded by Representative Pielli, to bring up the bill. Representative Venkat, your comments.
Thank you, Chair Solomon, Chair Gillen, members of the committee. The men and women of the Pennsylvania National Guard are the best among us in our Commonwealth, and it's really to the credit of our legislature and our then governor to have established the Military Family Education Program 6 years ago to recognize the service and sacrifice of the members of the National Guard. It was brought to my attention by a dear friend of mine who's a member of the Pennsylvania Air National Guard, Colonel Steve Guyton, that because this program, when established, it wasn't clear that this was a renewable benefit, that there was an opportunity for the legislature to move forward with a bill to confirm that eligibility. And I want to thank Representative Craig Williams, member of this committee, to have worked with me together on putting forward this legislation. And I think it's a simple example of how we can recognize the service and sacrifice of members of the National Guard and their family. And so I would humbly ask for an affirmative vote on this legislation.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And likewise, I'd like to thank Representative Venkat for reaching out. As I do on health issues with him, we look for people who have some expertise, and mine, unfortunately, is in the federal sphere, but the manner in which we bring these benefits forward is very similar for the National Guard, as you know, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you reaching out. I appreciate the work that we've been able to do on this bill, and I hope that we can advance it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Williams. Comments or questions on the bill? Chairman Gillen.
I think this bill is a natural offspring. I commend my colleague on the committee, Representative Craig Williams, for his passion on this and all things military, and I admire his distinguished service. Representative Venkat, I think this is the perfect marriage between two skill sets, two legislators who really get it, and they understand the value of these benefits to our service members. And so in terms of retention, I hope somewhere down the line, my daughter, who'll be commissioned as a second lieutenant in May, will be able to benefit from a program like this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Gillen. Are there any negative votes? Seeing none, House Bill 865 moves unanimously to the floor for consideration. Thank you so much. Next up, Senate Bill 173, authored by Senator Pennycook. Senator, oh, great, you're there. I will take a motion from Representative Stender, seconded by Representative Webster, to bring up Senate Bill 173. Okay, let's do the amendment, Senator, first, and then we'll get to your remarks. Let's take a motion from Representative Sappi, seconded by Representative Kerwin, to bring up Representative Genst Amendment A00090. Is she here? No. She's not online, right? Okay. Carrie, would you please provide an explanation of this technical amendment?
Amendment A0090 would make simple technical changes to the language that brings the language in line with DMVA's preference, changing Pennsylvania military forces to United States military forces.
Thank you, Carrie. Any questions or comments on the amendment? Representative Rigby.
Just want to check if the maker of the bill was okay with the amendment.
Sure. Senator?
I
Or-
am okay. It's a technical amendment that just it's clarifying language. I am okay with the amendment.
Thank you. Other questions, comments on the amendment? Chairman Gillen? He's good? Okay. Any negative votes on the amendment? Amendment 00090 is adopted. Now to the underlying bill, Senate Bill 173. Senator, with your comments.
Thank you, Chairman Solomon, Chairman Gillen, and committee members for your consideration of Senate Bill 173. Over 350,000 soldiers from the Republic of Korea served alongside American troops in Vietnam, and many of them later immigrated to the United States. Hundreds of these Korean allies now reside as natural citizens in Pennsylvania. Senate Bill 173 is modeled after the federal Korean American Vietnam Allies Long Overdue for Relief Act, and it would extend the same rights and privileges to eligible Korean American veterans who served between January 1962 and May 7th, 1975, and are recognized by the federal VA as Korean American veterans. I'm very thankful for this committee's unanimous passage last session of this bill, and I ask for your positive consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Comments on Senate Bill 173 as amended? Chairman Gillen.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Penny Cook. We overlay into Berks County and we share common ground. Again, I appreciate your service and your heart for making sure that our allies are properly recognized. I'd like to say, for those that may be a little bit unfamiliar with the history of these programs, we have had an allied beneficiary program in place since the 1950s. And that particular program at a federal level provided support and benefits for our allies who served with us during the First and the Second World War. And so this is an expansion on an idea that already exists. It was in place at a federal level. And if I could just hasten to add, if I could offer public thanks to those that stood with us in Vietnam, because many countries talk about freedom, but the defense of freedom and putting your boots on the ground in a foreign land, like the New Zealanders did, like the Aussies did, the Australians had boots on the ground, or those from the Philippines and Thailand, and experienced casualties. There were 15,000 casualties that our South Korean friends accrued during their involvement in the Vietnam War, including 5,000 deaths. And so I think this is a small way for us to say thank you. I appreciate your effort, Senator Pennycook.
Thank you, Chairman Gillen. Are there any negative votes on Senate Bill 173? Senate Bill 173 moves to the floor unanimously for consideration. Senator, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, Charlotte and your crew, can you all come on up? So I want to introduce the committee to Charlotte McDaniel, who is the author of Stories Untold, Oral Histories of Wives of Vietnam Servicemen. Yeah, please hold that up so the members can see. Thank you. Yeah, you can, don't be shy, come on over. Yeah, sit, please.
Yeah, please take a seat. Thank you.
Please. And along with Charlotte, we have several of the women who were interviewed for her book. Claudia Grantham. Hi, Claudia. Barbara LaPosta. Leela Matthews. Holly Poltz. And Lori Spada. Welcome. Now, I think we're going to start with Charlotte to talk a bit about her book, and then anyone who would like to provide remarks to the committee will go to you first, and then members will have their comments and questions. Welcome to the House. It is an honor to have you all here today. Charlotte, please. Let's get your mic on first so we can hear you.
Thank you so very much.
There you go.
Yeah. It is truly an honor and a pleasure to be here. I think I speak for all of us here. This is a very exciting day. and one that we feel is a bit overdue, but we're thrilled that we're doing it today. It's the 50th year of the end of the war in Vietnam, and it seems very apropos. I also want to start with some thank yous. So I'm in Pittsburgh, and I'm working with Todd DiPastino of the Veterans Breakfast Club to tell him that I'm trying to get some recognition for the wives of Vietnam veterans. He said, why don't you talk to Brigadier General John Pippy, also Pittsburgh. So Pippy says to me, call Dan Frankel, who I just had a chance to thank. And Dan puts together a conference call with Michael Hillman and Jared Solomon, and we moved, and here we are today. So thank you. We wouldn't be here without the wonderful work that you're doing. And I also want to comment on the prior actions that you've taken. We're really very appreciative of that. So I'm at a family reunion in the Midwest, which is where I grew up, large family, and my youngest first cousin turns to me and she says, Cousin Charlotte, my dad was so crazy about you, and you guys were so close. I bet you've got some stories you could tell me. I'd love to hear them. She's actually the age of my older son. I said, absolutely. Dad, or Jim to me, was like a brother. We were close in age. He saved me from a swimming pool when I was 5. I spent a month with him when I graduated from college. So we go back a long way. Dad also was a colonel in the U.S. Air Force, shot down over Vietnam in April of '68 when so many were lost, the year we lost so many, and bailed out of a plane, F-105, landed beautifully, ran, pulled a chute, hid in the bushes, and radioed back to a gentleman in his squadron saying, I'm okay, guys, but I can hear the Viet Cong. I'm not going into more detail because you can use your own imagination. He was listed as a POW for 8 very long years. It was horrific for his wife and the children. And sadly, he did not come back home. So this young lady that I'm speaking with is the youngest of his 3 children. She was born 6 months after he was shot down. And I've learned from this book and talking with these wives that one of the real differences is loss when you don't have those actual memories of your own, as opposed to having people tell you about it. So automatically, that request for stories took on a heightened importance and interest. So the question was, as I drove back to my home in Virginia at the time, not whether I would, but what could I do to answer her question? I thought about my stories, and they're a little limited because I was so much younger at the time. But I thought, it'd be fabulous if I could put her in touch with some of the wonderful squadron mates that were working with Jim up until literally the day he was shot down. So I'm thinking, how do you do that? I'm in Virginia, it's a military-oriented state. I had a lot of friends in the military, also some retired Air Force. So I started asking questions, and after no, and more no's, I decided to get real creative. And you should feel free to chuckle. I woke up one morning and I said to myself, you know what? I think I'm going to do a little cold call to the Pentagon. So I did, 10 o'clock in the morning. I know, my friends were betting on how well this would work out. And I got this lovely young man on the phone. His name was Brian. And he answered the phone, and I told him who I was, and I explained to him what I wanted. And he said, well, I said, and if you want to think of it as a bit wonky, that's okay too. And he chuckled. He said, yeah, ma'am, it is. It's just a little bit kind of weird. We don't normally get these kinds of calls. But you know what? He said, it's a really worthy cause. I was thrilled that he didn't hang up. We talked for a few minutes. I gave him everything I could think of about myself and Jim, to move this along. And to keep this a little shorter, Mr. Solomon, he finally said to me, I'm going to ask my supervisor, I'll get permission. How about we touch base in 2 weeks, hang up the phone. Handshaking, I walked back to my kitchen to get a really strong cup of coffee. After all, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. And the phone rang again. And I looked down, and the number was the same one I had just called. And I'm thinking immediately, what did I leave out? What did I forget to say? And Brian says to me, Dr. McDaniel, what would you like? I have permission to give you anything you want. So in addition to a number of other documents, I get the names of 17 men that served with Jim up until the time he was shot down. But it doesn't make any sense. I mean, how do you start with 17 names that you don't know? I noticed one, however, that lived in North Carolina, and I happened to be on the board of a nonprofit in North Carolina. So I thought, yeah, maybe I could at least go and meet him at some point. We could talk. So I called him, another one of those cold calls. And the gentleman answers the phone, Joe. And he said, Joe Sheckler, can I help you? I told him who I was, and I wondered if he'd have time to talk with me about Jim Metz. And there was a very long, about 90-second silence. After I waited, and I kept saying to myself, well, he's not hanging up, he came back on the phone with a very choked voice, and he said, Charlotte, how much time do you have? It would be an honor to talk with you about Jim. So we talked for a little more than an hour, and he said, we're starting to do reunions. It's really helpful to the guys. And by the way, that's a really helpful structure for many of the guys, especially if they don't want to talk about the war. And I said, well, we'll be there. So then I called my cousin and say, we're going to a reunion. She was very anxious about it. She just wasn't sure how that would work out, if she could handle this. So to make a long story short, we went to a reunion of the squadron in the fall. And I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I have never in my life been treated with more graciousness and hospitality and compassion. It was a turnaround for those children because we included the older brother and sister. There's about 12 years difference there. But what really gets down to the point of this conversation for us today is that those men embraced those 3 children. And as I said, it was a real turnaround for them. Questions and conversations they had never known about their dad because they were so young when he was shot down, when he died. But I would go off and talk with the ladies. Hospitality room was up and running and doing well, and we'd go have a beer or whatever and sit and talk, and they would tell me about what they had been doing when their husbands were deployed, the struggles they had, the lack of respect, tomatoes being thrown at them if they'd go to a parade. One woman was told in a grocery store, your husband was in Vietnam before he was shot down. This was 6 months before. Well, he shouldn't have been over there. And I'm quoting, ladies and gentlemen, he got right what he deserved. There's a range of things that these women have dealt with, from positive to really horrific to in between, and you're going to hear some of those directly from them today. But I said to these ladies, who's writing down these stories? These are just remarkable. And it would be a shame to see them just, disappear. And I got different responses from them. I'm ratting you out here. I don't write well. I don't know how I'd do that. No thanks, I don't want to relive that war. I put it aside. Oh my gosh, she said, when my husband came back, we just jumped into the kids again and kept on moving, and we really haven't thought about it. So fast forward, I was by that time retired, and my friends were leaning on me. I think the term is lean in. Why don't you write this down? And to be very honest, I had no clue where to start. This is not what I was doing in my career, but I ended up doing it. And yes, we have this book, Stories Untold. And I am also going to tell you that it is, and I say this with sadness, not pride, it's the only book about women from the entire Vietnam era. It's real stories. There was one novel that came out, but it is a fictionalized version. It's a lovely read. But these are the stories, the words of these women, and they were transcribed and taped and transcribed. So the book is a short read. I never describe it as, I hope you enjoy it, because it's not that kind of read. But it does, I think, represent a really good sample of the wives of men while they were deployed in Vietnam. It represents all the branches of the military, demographics, including persons of color, the enlisted officers, those who were drafted, those who didn't want to be drafted, and they live all over the United States. We have one from Connecticut here. So I think it's a fair representation. And the one most consistent theme that I got from every single woman that I talked with, over 30, and including some that couldn't be included, so we're talking maybe 50 wives, thank you for coming and talking with me, because no one ever has. No one's respected what we did. And I found myself, in listening to these amazing stories, women who were so strong, so resilient, just incredible. It was a real honor and privilege to be the person to whom they were sharing these stories for the first time. So I'm here today to say that I'm delighted that you're taking this action. I think it's well worthwhile. And in my sense, we're really looking at a situation where you have men who've served so valiantly and bravely doing their duty for their country in their own way, but we also have women. And of the husbands that I was able to talk to when I was interviewing these women, said, you know, I could never have done what I did if it hadn't been for my wife back home. I knew they had things battened down and were taking care of it. One man was a helicopter pilot for the Hueys, and he said that bar is so sensitive that if you jiggle it the wrong way, in a second you're down. And he said, if I was distracted worrying about my kids or my wife or the things that were going on, it wouldn't work. So these women, in my opinion, my humble opinion, deserve our respect, our thank you for a very unique service to their country. No, it's not the same as what the men at the time were doing, but I think it is a unique and respected position. So in closing, I would say, as the Bard said, thanks, thanks, and many thanks.
Charlotte, thank you so much for spending some time with us here today and providing a framework for the stories that we are now going to hear. Claudia, can I start with you, please? Not yet.
Not yet.
No, the button, there's a button right.
Now I'm on.
Now you're on.
Okay.
You're live.
I've got a good principal voice if you want it. And starting after Charlotte is a little tough. But I will tell you that the one word that kept coming back to me as I thought about our time in the service, and I'm a wife of a second lieutenant who went through ROTC in college in order to get his architectural degree, and then we spent 2 years doing our service, and part of that was in Vietnam, is support. We were the support. We were the people who got those tapes on the cassette players to our guys. We wrote 2 letters a week. We sent care packages. Mine was full of homemade cookies and caramels because he would feed the caramels to the rats in the hooches so that they would get caught and not nibble at his toes. We were the ones that, as Charlotte indicated, would hold down the fort at home so they could then think about what they were doing. He was a combat engineer. He replaced somebody who wasn't as fortunate and lost 2 arms and a leg. But he was clearing fire bases, building bridges, and doing the hard work after the infantry with his group. We supported those people directly. And then maybe once every 2 weeks, we got a Mars call where you'd say, hello, how are you? Over. And they'd say, fine, over. And at that point, we knew they were alive. That was an incredible delight, if you can imagine. We also supported their parents and their families and their extended families. I didn't have a child at the time. I was going to grad school. So I had an opportunity to go up and support my mother-in-law, who had not only my husband, but a younger brother in Vietnam at the same time, and get her through and help her get through these very, very difficult times, because every time we went out in public, it was a barrage of distaste, of denigration to what our husbands were doing. I was going to college, and I had a college professor who said, no, you can't go to R&R. I won't let you. I said, really? It's a week. I'll have my work done. We had a little chat with the dean, and I did get to go to Hawaii. But people were not happy when they found out what our husbands were doing. And we were the front line of that. So we were the support to get people to understand that we were going to get through this and get through this tumultuous time in a very, very planned, secure way for them so they could do the job that they needed to do in Vietnam. We have since then come back. I got him out a little bit early because there was an early out. It was the end of the war. He went back to school, and we have continued our lives. But even when we came back, we didn't talk about it. We didn't want people to know what had happened to us because nobody thought it was important. Nobody thought it was the right thing to do. We understood that, but we knew it was the right thing to do for us. So in a capsule, that's what I would leave you with, the kinds of things. And to this day, he has talked about it. He took all the photographs that he took and made a beautiful book and pictures of his life there. But it wasn't until his 12-year-old son had a high school class and the teacher discovered that Ron was a veteran that he came in and started to talk about it. And at that point, we began to hear some of the stories. And that was at least 15 years later. So it's taken a long time for this generation to change, to evolve, and to have lives that they deserved and needed. And he's gone on to be quite a good architect and has had a happy life. And we've been very fortunate, and I appreciate that. But the support that that I was able to give, and it taught me about what support meant in the first way. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you so much. We're joined by Representative Scott. Leela, will you please share with us? Hold on, let's get you a mic so we can all hear you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for inviting us, for having us here. I was really, really surprised when I heard from Charlotte when she called me to tell me about what she was planning to do, and I thought it was a very, very, very good idea. The support that her book and her information that she has gathered to help all of us. And my husband did not die in Vietnam. My husband died just before the Vietnam War. But I've always supported and have had the support from everyone and those women. And that what has kept us together also, because we have been very helpful and strong and supportive of each other. And we will continue to be.
Thank you so much. Holly, please. Let's get you a mic. And then please start.
Is it on? It's on. Okay. Is this good?
Maybe.
A little closer.
How about that?
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. I have been filled with anxiety, thinking about being with you, facing you. My husband was a Marine, infantryman. I have prepared something. Would you allow me to read it? Okay, thank you. I stand before you today not just as the wife of a Vietnam veteran, but as a representative of all the wives, the women who have stood in the shadows of history, who have fought battles of their own, not on distant battlefields, but within their own homes, hearts, and marriages. We are the silent sentinels of sacrifice, the ones who carry the weight of war long after the guns have gone silent. For 56 years, I was married to Dan Poltz, a Marine, a leader, a warrior. But he was also a husband, a father, a grandfather, and my greatest love. His service in Vietnam, from leading India Company 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, in the Battle of Gatlin's Corner. Maybe you've heard of it. It was one of the most decorated battles of the Vietnam War, March 30th, 1967. He also was there at the siege of Khe Sanh, and all of these experiences shaped him. But like so many of the men who served, it also left wounds that were not always visible. When Dan came home, his service did not end. He built a life, he built businesses, and he built a legacy of giving back to his fellow veterans. But those of us who love these men know that the war never truly leaves them. We see it in their quiet moments, in the sleepless nights, in the unspoken memories that haunt them. And as their wives, we become their caretakers, their anchors, and their safe harbor. We learn patience in the face of pain. We learn strength when they struggle to find their own. We learn how to listen to what is said, and more importantly, to what is left unsaid. And we do this not because we are asked, but because we love them. Dan dedicated his post-military life to ensuring that no veteran was left behind. He worked with the Veterans Leadership Program, VLP, in Pittsburgh. He became a team leader at Semper Fi Odyssey. Maybe you've heard of this amazing program that Major General Tom Jones has designed in Boswell, Pennsylvania, which is a little outside of Altoona. He became a team leader there and helped build a school in Da Nang with funding from the Friends of Da Nang of Pittsburgh and his fellow veterans of I-39. And he mentored thousands of veterans as they transitioned to civilian life. He understood what war took from these men, and he spent his life trying to give something back. But as I reflect on his life and service, I cannot help but think of all the wives who stood beside men like Dan, the ones who have cared for husbands battling physical wounds, PTSD, and the lingering ghosts of war. The ones who've raised children while their husbands were deployed, the ones who have learned to navigate the unique loneliness that comes from loving a man who has seen and experienced war. We too have served. We too have sacrificed. And yet too often our stories often go untold. Thank you to you. So today, as we honor the men who gave so much for this country, let us also acknowledge the women who stood beside them, the wives who waited, who comforted, and who endured, the wives who, like me, know what it means to love a veteran, not just in their moments of triumph, but in their moments of struggle. Dan had a philosophy he called Vault. He was writing a book about it when he passed away a little more than a year ago on the eve of Thanksgiving of 23. The belief, and the acronym is VAULT, and that's the title of his book. The belief that every person longs to be valued, accepted, understood, loved, and trusted. I believe this philosophy applies not just to our veterans, but to those of us who stand beside them. We too deserve to be seen, to be heard, and to be recognized for the battles we have fought at home. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Holly. Really moving. Thank you. Lori.
Hi. Oops. There we go. Hi, I'm Lori Spada. I honor these women who, for the last 50 years, carried the load. I didn't. My husband died when I was 18, 7 months pregnant, and And so I lost him. And the part of me that died when he died was hope, faith, and compassion. So I was left with a vacuum of plans. We had lots and lots of plans. We sent, he was in the Central Highlands. He was killed after 3 months. And I don't know if you guys remember, but that was called FNG. You were supposed to stay away from the FNGs. And that was a effing new guy. So, and as I go back and read over his letters that I kept, and it seemed like he was pretty isolated there. He drove a Jeep for CO, I guess, something like that, and then he was demoted or moved to an armored personnel carrier. And the day that he died, he was the single gunner of the APCs. In the jargon in Vietnam was the APCs was a Spam can with a straw sticking out of the head of it. So when he was on a reconnaissance mission, meet on the top of the mountain, meet your new CO, blah, 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 turn around. His was the last vehicle in, first vehicle out. He was the only one out of the 5 who was killed. Other ones were injured, but I lost track of them. His family and I had a difficult relationship because they were immigrants from Italy, and they needed someone to blame, and I was the one to blame. So it was a difficult, I was living with my parents, and I just, 6 months after he died, I went back to night school, and then it started to get really, really bad about, love it or leave it. And so I just decided to leave it and just went on my own way with my baby. And so for my 20s, I was a rebel. Came back when I was 30. Then I picked up my GI Bill. It was wonderful that it was still there. Wonderful that I was able to, become a human being again. And 25 years after he died, I walked into the vet center in Pittsburgh, which was an open mental health facility. And I said, I think I belong here. The guy in charge, Dave McPeak, said, I'm going to check you out first. And I didn't know what that meant, but there were a lot of wannabes at that time. Everybody wants to be a veteran. They want to be a Vietnam vet, 25 years later. So he checked me out and found out that I was real and let me sit in on for 5 years in a high incident PTSD group. And I listened once a week to everybody who talked. I rarely talked because I wanted to learn what my husband's life would have been like in country. And it filled in the gaps that I had, and it really turned me into another better kind of human being. The whole time I'm in the Gold Star Wives with Leela. We go all the way back. So I'm traveling, I'm doing this, doing that, graduating from this, graduating from that. And I'm a good mother. I, raised 2 kids. I have 4 grandkids. I don't know how I did it. I don't know how they didn't get so messed up. But I had good parents, and in times of trouble, I went back home. When I turned 50, I decided, I had another divorce. So I decided that I had to, I found or it just came upon me, an invitation to go to Vietnam with the Sons and Daughters in Touch, which is a group that my daughter refused. She went to one meeting and she said, I can't do it because these people talk about their fathers. She said, I never knew my father. And it was just too sad for her. So I went with this group to Vietnam, and it, again, was a very life-changing thing. But it brought me from separating from reality, brought me back to reality. And I can't thank the Sons and Daughters in Touch enough for helping me become a better human being. So I'm like back, I think I'm all the way back to being the person that I was when he died right now at 75. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lori. Barbara.
Okay. I'm married to my husband, who is a retired Army officer of 21 years. He came from a poor family, and he got a full scholarship to Virginia Military Institute, and that's why he decided to make the military his career, although his classmates laugh and say he's the last person. He's a big teddy bear. If you think of a football player that's retired, that's my husband. What a lot of people don't think of is the family unit of a military officer or an enlisted man, or women now. We are the people behind those officers. And when I married my husband, I was 21 years old. I was young, dumb, and happy. And I wasn't prepared for what happened after he came back from Vietnam. We were married 6 months. He went to Vietnam. And when he came home, you know, after I guess you'd call it the honeymoon time, then the little bits started coming out of what happened to my husband. And for instance, when he came back the first time from Vietnam, we went to Aberdeen Proving Ground. We were walking across a major intersection in Baltimore, and a car backfired, and he hit the ground. And I'm saying, get up, there's cars are gonna come, the cars are gonna come. And he said, I thought it was incoming. I thought there was ammunition going to hit us. When we were in Baltimore, people were not very nice to us. Now, you could tell that my husband was in the military because he had short hair. And in the 60s, nobody had short hair. And they would spit toward us. They would turn their backs on us. They would call him a baby killer, not even knowing whether he had been in Vietnam. So his solution to the problem was he went out and bought a wig. So my children used to laugh every time we would go through picture albums at my husband with long hair, because they never saw him with long hair. But we would wait till we were off post, and he would put his wig on. And then we could go to Baltimore to the movies or wherever restaurants or wherever we were going. That's how bad it got. And I'm sure my husband came home with PTSD, but there was no help for it. If you were an officer, you were told not to go for any kind of mental health conversations or anything like that, because two things. One, it would show that you were weak. And two, the Russians might find out about it, and they would blackmail you. Now, we've never ran into any Russians in the 21 years or the 26 moves that we had. But that was one of the reasons you were not supposed to get it. My husband went back to Vietnam again in '72 and was in some of the major battles over there. '72 was a really bad year. You know, he came home then another layer of PTSD. And through the years, I guess I learned to cope with him and he learned to cope with me. But it also affects the children of the military family. Our daughter is sitting right over there, and she didn't like her father when he came home. She didn't know who he was, for one thing. I mean, she looked at his picture every night, but she had no idea who he was. We lived with my parents, and my father became the father figure. So she didn't like him because he took her away from the person she felt was basically her father. So those are some of the things that they did learn to like each other, in fact, very well. And in fact, she and her husband and son moved in with us to help take care of my husband, who had a stroke 30 years ago. And they could find nothing wrong with him. He didn't have high blood pressure. He didn't have any of the things that you look for in a stroke. And the neurologist told us that probably when he got Rob's background, he said, I'm finding a lot of people who served in Vietnam are having a lot of health issues that I think came from being in Vietnam and not being able to talk about what they did or having anyone to talk to. So anyway, my husband is now 100% disabled through the VA. And if I can add one last thing, at least the VA in Pittsburgh has been marvelous to us. We've gotten equipment, we've gotten ramps, they've widened the door so he could get out in his wheelchair. I mean, they have just done absolutely anything and everything we asked for. I'm also a caretaker, part of the caretaker program, and I get paid to take care of him because he is 100% disabled. And it's one of the best things that's ever happened. I think it's great. We have a nurse now 4 days a week. And so, you know, I hope those things do not get cut with some of the major cuts that are happening, because I think the VA got it right. And I hope that being right, they don't have their services cut, because it's something that the veterans earned and something that also helps the family, because this goes on for years. Thank you very much for listening to us today.
Thank you so much. Before we get to comments and discussion, I'm going to recognize Chairman Gillen for the purpose of a motion.
Yeah, thank you so much, ladies. This has been inspiring. It's been heartwarming. It's been motivating. And I had two thoughts sitting here that I wanted all of you in the legislature, but I'm not sure that you'll run. So I decided we would go with the second best. So I would like to make a motion, and we'll have a voice vote on it, to make these fine ladies honorary members of the Veterans Affairs Committee. That is my motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Gillen. And if we could all register our support with a warm, rousing round of applause for these amazing women. Chairman Gillen, thanks for that. If you want to continue, if you have any remarks or questions or anything.
I made a comment to Sean here. I'm not sure who's filming this, but I would like a copy of it, and I would be interested in distributing it, because what you shared here struck a chord with so many of us. I think it was riveting, and we would like to package it and redistribute it, because I think it would be extraordinarily meaningful, not just in the veterans community, but in the greater culture. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And of course, we'll come back to you, Chairman Gillen, if you have further comments. Members of the committee, we can just go around the horn if folks have anything.
Right.
Representative Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first I'm going to apologize because I'm supposed to be someone else right now, and I could not leave. But I think we have to second the motion, so I'm second. I want to make sure you understand that in parliamentary procedure, I'm honored to say that. I'm also, if you're not sure why there's space between my words, this is a little bit difficult for me because I see each of you and I see my own life out there. And I know for Colonel Williams had to leave early, but I suspect he felt the same way. And there are a number of veterans in this committee. You wouldn't be surprised. There are also members here who are currently serving in the reserve and in the Guard. Your stories are are daunting to me, and they're also inspiring. Your exceptional experience and the resilience that each of you bears is it's a little bit overwhelming. And I know I'm being, you know, I may be the guy who crawls under the desk to hide from the incoming fire here in a minute. And I really was not in combat in the same way. But we all come home a little different. And I can, you know, to be personal about that, I've found a couple of times when my wife had put gas in the car, had it turned around in the driveway, had the kids in the back seats, and didn't know where she was going to go next. And I suspect that whether that's real or just internal, emotional, you've all had that sensation. So I just want to say thank you. And sitting here today listening took me in a lot of different directions. So I raised my hand the first time in 1976. I was not part of the Vietnam generation in that regard. I missed it by this much. My cousin Johnny, my cousin Jack, my cousin Jim, all ended up in Vietnam, all U.S. Army. And their lives have been very, very difficult. They fortunately returned. They unfortunately paid a very high price, and so did their families. And so this is really personal, and I thank each of you for having the strength to tell your story. Charlotte, for recording those stories and retelling them. And I can't wait to force myself through, because I'm not sure it'll be easy to read them, right, but I'll do it. Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Representative Webster. Representative Sappi.
Thank you so much, ladies, for being here this morning with us. I recognize some of you from the hotel this morning, coffee kiosk. I didn't know who you were at the time, but I'm so grateful for your stories. The Vietnam War was a huge part of my childhood and my youth, and I think for some folks, you're scratching the surface of things that we suspected and didn't know. My father suffered from PTSD and did not talk about his experience for a long, long time. And, you know, how that impacted our relationship and how we grew through that was something that I look back on now and I treasure, but it's so important that we share our stories for all of the folks that are coming up behind us. We can make it better, but these stories cannot be forgotten. And so I'm so grateful for the way you held your families together, held your communities together, sought answers and information, and, are here today to courageously share your story. So thank you so, so much.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much for coming here today and sharing your stories of sacrifice and also your personal courage to be here. As somebody who has served in the Army and also deployed, I can attest to the fact of having the family support system back home is integral to being able to not just succeed at the mission, but also come back into society. And I'm just really touched by your stories, each and every one of you. I'm really appreciative of you being here and sharing those stories with us. I can't imagine what it was like to be a military family member in the Vietnam era. I'm a global war on terrorism veteran, and veterans now are treated so much differently than they were back then. And hearing your stories and hearing how you were treated, how your loved ones, your husbands were treated, it really pains me, but I'm just grateful for your strength to be here today to share their stories, and I'm thankful for all of your loved ones' sacrifices and their service to this nation. Thank you.
Representative, yep.
Just to echo Representative Kerwin, Representative Sappi, really appreciate you guys coming in today. More importantly, opening up the dialogue to hear these stories is extremely important. I never had the privilege to serve. I've been a firefighter my whole life, so it wasn't until I had kids that I noticed a shift in how I acted at work or changed a lot of the ways I looked at things. And, you know, I wouldn't ask my wife certain questions because I just didn't want to have to deal with that then too. But this is always helpful. Thank you for opening up the lines of communication. It's really important that, you know, as a dad of daughters, I want them to hear stories like this to understand what people before us went through and different ways we can learn from that and improve upon as we move forward. So thank you guys so much for making the trip to Harrisburg. We really appreciate it, and, you know, we'll be sure to get a copy of that book today. So thank you so much.
Representative Rigby.
Thank you, and thank you all. These are stories that need to be told and not forgotten. I am not a veteran. Actually, they wouldn't take me in my senior year. I tried to get into the Air Force, but I am the son, brother, and father of veterans. And you know, my brother, my oldest brother, Rick, was drafted in 1968. He was fortunate. He spent his time in Hawaii. He was an aerial photographer where he flew over, and then they laid a 3D mapping out. So while he wasn't stationed in Vietnam, he certainly spent time going back and forth. And he came home, and he was fine. But the story I'd like to share is my friend who was like my big brother, Lee Meadows, was a 1969 graduate of Ferndale High School. I used to get up in the morning. I was 9 years old. I'd wake him up. They'd leave the basement door open, and I'd go up to his bedroom and wake him up, and we'd go deliver newspapers on the weekends. Little did I know, half the neighborhood helped deliver Lee's papers. I thought I was a special kid. I was the only one that got to do that. Lee went to Vietnam in 1970, where he was shot down and killed. He came home after boot camp, came down and visited me. 3 months later, we lost him, September 15th, 1970. My kids, who are now 30s, 3 of them, every year, my dad did it with us. We do it with our kids. We go to Washington, D.C., and we trace the name on the wall of Lee. Best Father's Day gift ever, 8 years ago. My children got me his bracelet. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for sharing the stories, and they're stories that need to be shared and not forgotten. So I thank you all.
Thank you. Representative Krupa.
I want to thank you all so very much for being here and sharing your stories. I come from a military family. My father was served in the early 80s, so he missed Vietnam, and I personally am very grateful that he did. I've got 2 brothers that served in Iraq and Afghanistan, but when you know, as a younger person studying about Vietnam, it was so upsetting to hear about the way our veterans were treated and our veterans' families. And so I'm an idealist, so really, you know, there's a way things should be, and when you hear about when they don't work out that way, it's really upsetting. But what you shared today was so very touching. And to hear it from people that lived it, I can't imagine what you personally went through and what you saw your husbands go through. But I thank you for your service and for sharing that today. So I'm going to stop because I'm getting emotional. Thank you.
I'm going to make a couple remarks and then turn it back, if it's okay, Chairman Gillen, to you, because I have a piece of legislation running in another committee. I want to thank you again. Claudia, you talked about in your comments that typically these are stories that are not told. You said that we don't typically talk about it. Charlotte, what you have done is we are now talking about it, and that is the true gift of your book. The story you told, Charlotte, about the encounter in the grocery store is really important. All of these stories are important because what I really like about what you're doing, Charlotte, and what all of you are doing is you're not sanitizing these stories. You're just being open in a narrative with us. And oftentimes when we talk about women and families that support people who serve, it begins and ends with they provide the support for our men and women that serve our country. but we don't hear the stories. We don't see the faces. We don't feel the emotions. And while men and women go to serve, as you all mentioned, your lives continue. You look to get a new job or further your own education. You deal with that friend or family member who asks you, how are you doing? Well, how can you possibly answer that question? And thinking whether that person even really wants to know. Holly, you talked about the invisible wounds that you are all dealing with every single day. And you brought us in to just feel a little bit of that. And we hope that that narrative becomes one that not only our committee, but all Pennsylvanians can hear. Some of the emotions, Lori, that you talked about, you mentioned compassion, hope, and faith. That gives us sort of a little window about some of the way that you were feeling and some of the what you dealt with each and every day. And finally, Barbara mentioned that while service was something that your husband might have been prepared for, there was no preparation for, as you termed it, the after. And I don't think a lot of us think about the after. We are good at acknowledging service. We are good at raising the flag. We are good at doing sort of all the ornamental supports. But when it comes to hearing the stories, listening to the pain and suffering, sometimes we fall short. But today, we do that work, and I hope to continue this conversation so that all of us can get a sense of who you are and that your stories are stories that are told and retold throughout our Commonwealth. Thank you so much. Chairman Gillen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been participating in these type of meetings now since I was first elected in 2010. I was sworn in 2011. And I would say there's been more inspiration in the room today and more tears and emotion than I've ever experienced being on the Veterans Affairs and Emergency Preparedness Committee. My office is just around the corner in the East Wing, and I have a little bit of a display area, and I prominently moved a Foot Locker out of my back office with some display items because a couple months ago, Harry Montgomery's widow indicated that because she was downsizing and had to move some things out, she indicated that Harry Montgomery, who is a Vietnam veteran's Foot Locker, would certainly be available to me for display and some of his mementos. And so I moved them to the forefront of the office on 18 East Wing if anybody wanted to stop by. I know that we have a luncheon coming up in the main Capitol, 331, which is Chairman Solomon's office. But let me close maybe with a little bit of a lighter note. Barb, I think, mentioned that when we were young, dumb, and happy, I think you said, okay, describing early marriage. I think I'm still dumb and happy. I'm not sure about the young part. Been married for over 30 years, but thank you, ladies, for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your heart. Thank you for sharing your lives, your time, and certainly your inspiration. Unless a committee member wishes to speak yet, Mike is giving me a signal. Representative Sappi, did you want to just say something? Yeah. Representative Sappi, I think since we don't have any unfinished business, then I'm going to recognize Representative Sappi to formally conclude our meeting.
Thank you again, ladies. And this meeting of the Veterans Affairs and Emergency Preparedness Committee is formally adjourned.